You were born in 1926 in a quiet coastal town near Mokpo, a place where the mornings smelled of seawater and drying nets. Women hummed old melodies while repairing fishing lines, and children chased crabs along the shore. Those memories faded early, because by the time you were 14, the songs had become whispers. Japanese soldiers patrolled the streets with the certainty of people who believed they owned the land. At school, you were forced to repeat imperial slogans every morning. Each time your tongue slipped into Korean, the teacher corrected you with his bamboo stick. You were Han Unmi at home, but on every document, you were already listed as Nakamura Eiko, as if a new name could erase your past. Your father once owned a small fishing boat, but the military seized it for wartime purposes. Your mother worked through the nights, mending nets for a handful of rice. Your younger sister coughed with a fragile sound that grew heavier with each passing day. Hunger and silence filled your home, pressing against the walls. One evening, two officials arrived with an interpreter. They carried pamphlets showing smiling girls in factory uniforms. They spoke of work in the South, good pay, regular meals, safe dormitories. The interpreter avoided your eyes, but the promises were enough to make your parents hesitate. Your father touched the brochure as if it were a lifeline. Your mother looked at your sister and her trembling became harder to hide. You sensed danger beneath their polished tone, but hunger dulls instinct. You said you would go. Your father lowered his head as though the words relieved and wounded him at the same time. 3 mornings later, you were pushed into a dark freight car with other girls. The doors were locked from the outside. There were no windows or seats, only a pile of straw on the floor and a bucket in one corner. The air grew thick with fear and heat. On the 3rd day, the interpreter finally revealed the truth. You were not going to a factory. You were being transported to a comfort station. The guard beside him laughed, as if cruelty were part of the routine. That night, a girl tried to claw her way out through the wood. The guards dragged her out of the train, and it continued moving without her. When the train stopped at last, the air was heavy with jungle heat. You had been taken far from Korea. A truck carried you to a military compound surrounded by barbed wire and watchtowers. Searchlights swept across the ground. A soldier spoke with a practiced monotone. You will serve the Imperial Army. You will not resist. You are number 21. A wooden plaque bearing the name Sato Harumi was nailed above a small room with a cot and a basin. As you ran your fingers across the plaque, you felt your true name slipping away. The first soldier arrived before sunset. He smelled of sweat and alcohol. You begged in Korean, and he struck you in Japanese. When he finished, you lay curled on your side, staring at a crack in the wall, realizing that the girl you had been no longer existed. Days blurred into one another. You learned how to separate your mind from your body. In your imagination, you built a small white room with open windows and the sound of the ocean, a place where no one could touch you. Some of the other girls developed their own ways of enduring. One silently mouthed childhood songs, another scratched small marks beneath her cot to count the days, one stopped speaking entirely. You grew close to a girl named Yuri from Busan. She showed you how to survive. She knew which guards were more lenient, which soldiers turned violent, and how to fake a fever without facing punishment. You held on to her presence the way a drowning person holds on to a piece of wood. By 1943, your joints ached constantly. By 1944, your body weakened and bled without warning. By 1945, your teeth loosened from malnutrition. New girls continued to arrive. Some survived. Some broke within days. At night, you and Yuri whispered the real names of the girls who had died, giving their identities back to the darkness so they would not be forgotten. Then, everything changed. Guards burned documents. Officers shouted behind closed doors. Rumors spread that some stations were killing the women before retreating. Yuri overheard a guard saying there should be no witnesses. That night, during a storm, you and Yuri crawled under the fence after cutting the wire with a sharpened food tin. The jungle swallowed you in darkness. You ran until your legs shook, crossed streams, and followed faint stars that felt foreign to you. On the 3rd day, Yuri collapsed with high fever. She died before the next sunrise. You buried her under a tree and whispered her name, Lee Yu-ri, into the soil. Then you walked alone. Several weeks later, you reached a Burmese village, starved and shaking. The women fed you broth, but their eyes revealed discomfort. Your presence reminded them of things they did not want to confront. Months passed before Allied forces transported you back to Korea. Your mother cried when she saw you, horrified at how thin and pale you had become. Your father avoided your gaze. Your sister, now healthier, watched you from a distance with uncertainty. At night, you heard your parents whispering about your nightmares and your flinching at loud sounds. You realized they did not know how to carry your pain with you. One morning, you quietly packed your belongings and left without asking for permission. No one stopped you. Seoul offered anonymity. The city was rebuilding itself, and in its noise and movement, you found a place to disappear. You worked in sewing rooms, rented small corners in boarding houses, avoided crowds, avoided celebrations, avoided anything that reminded you of the life you had once imagined. You aged quickly. At 30, you looked nearly twice that age. A doctor once called your injuries war damage, as if you were a broken structure instead of a living human being. You filled notebooks with poetry that no one ever read. During the late 1980s, the country began to change. Students marched in the streets. Journalists pursued forgotten truths. One afternoon, you read an article seeking testimonies from former comfort women. You folded the newspaper and stared out the window for a long time. For 50 years, you had carried your history in silence. That night, you wrote a letter. You rewrote it many times before sending it. When researchers visited your small apartment, you told them fragments of your story. They listened without judgment, treating your experience as history rather than shame. In 1991, you stood before the Japanese embassy with a group of survivors. Many hid their faces. You chose not to. You said your name aloud, your real name. Han Unmi. You told the world you had been taken when you were 15, and that you wanted people to know the truth. Your voice spread beyond the crowd and into the public consciousness. Some people supported you. Some doubted you. Some told you to remain silent. But silence had already stolen enough of your life. You continued speaking at universities and public gatherings. Japan offered statements of regret, but no full acceptance of responsibility. You refused symbolic compensation. You said you wanted truth, not charity. Now in your final years, you sit by a window in a small apartment, watching young women walking freely down the street. When your niece once asked if you were ever afraid, you answered that fear was not the greatest prison. The greatest prison was silence. And, as you close your eyes at night, you take comfort in knowing that your story lives on in classrooms, memorials, and the voices of those who refuse to let history be forgotten. Through them, you have finally reclaimed a piece of the life that was taken from you.